Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses the potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing best practices for vehicle operations with a specific focus on backing. I want to welcome Mike Baker, Brian DeQuinn, and Dave Bradley. They're all members of the Client Risk Solutions team, and today we're going to review some best practices your organization should consider when developing a backing policy. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
Thanks, Chris.
Glad to be here.
So, Brian, I'm going to start the questioning with you. What are some of the common loss scenarios or claim trends that we see in regards to backing incidents?
I think one of our largest claims that we see as it relates to backing is backing into stations or other fixed objects, maybe around the station, on the scene. Those are the places that we really see high volumes.
I'll also add to that, Chris, that the majority of the claims that we do see here at VFIS actually are ones that don't involve a spotter.
Can you talk about the importance of having a written backing policy in our response guidelines?
Having a standard in place actually gives the members or the volunteers an understanding of the expectations of management. Itemizing those things out in a list format it gives them a clear expectation of how you want them to operate that vehicle. So placing that backing policy only helps to assure that they're doing what you want them to do.
Mike, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of times the best way that I describe it is the policies of an organization are really the playbook of that organization. And it's important for everybody to know what the play is that we're trying to accomplish. So that's really the easiest way to kind of explain why we're doing that.
And Chris, in conjunction with having the policies in place, actually, practicing those in trainings and whatnot is a key part of developing the culture of the organization.
So you mentioned, using a spotter as part of the backing policy, but that's not always feasible for some of the clients that we have. We run the gamut from all volunteer agencies to full career departments. So, what about those agencies like a volunteer fire department that may not have the personnel for a spotter at all times?
So I think it's important that we stop and we think about what we're going to do first. So in the situation of a backing, stop that vehicle, get out, conduct your 360, walk around the vehicle, make sure you know where your objects are. And if at any point in time you're not sure, stop and get out and check. It's important that we do things slowly and meticulously to avoid those incidents from occurring.
Yeah, the vehicles that we operate in the emergency services are just cluttered with blind spots and areas that you just can't see. So like Brian said, if a circle of safety or a walk around isn't just a once and done thing. I mean, if you're unsure, revisit that and do a second one, do a third one. Just make sure that your apparatus is clear from hitting any of those objects that are in the pathway of your backing.
And it's not always inanimate objects. It's not a stretch to say that, we've backed into stations, we backed into poles. It's not a stretch to say it could eventually be a person that walked into our blind spot. So that I think echoes to your point of if you're not sure to stop and then walk around and make yourself sure. And
another key aspect that's probably common sense to most of us is, boy, if you can even avoid the backing incident in the first place or backing, evolution. I mean, when you pull into a spot, make sure you have a way to pull forward out of that spot. Don't just assume that the only aspect that you can maneuver that vehicle would be to back out of wherever you're at. So put yourself in a position where pulling forward is the end result at any time you're possible to have that.
Dave, you had a follow-up point?
Yeah, Mike, to build on that point, one of the things we don't think about a lot is, okay, you're by yourself or you're with a crew member, especially in an ambulance, and you go to a convenience store, stop somewhere to get something to eat, back that vehicle into a spot. If there's no way to avoid backing, back that vehicle into the spot while it's a non-emergent situation. That way, if you get a call while you're there, you're able to pull right out without worrying about somebody getting out and spotting you.
Or even pull to an area of the parking lot where you don't have to back into a spot. See if there's an area over underneath a tree along the side of the curb or somewhere of that nature where there's no backing needed or required at any point.
So what are some of the key responsibilities when playing the role of a spotter?
I think the key part of a spotter responsibility is communication. So a standard set of hand signals would be a key. The other side is you always want to be in a position as a spotter that you have eye contact with that operator. So, standing on the driver's side of the vehicle about 8 or 10 feet behind the vehicle is probably the key place where you would want to put yourself. And then, again, standardizing your hand signals. And if there's anything that you see, stop that driver. And the last thing I'll say is look up, because the obstructions that you may hit aren't necessarily on the ground. It might be a basketball overhang. It might be a canopy. It might be a tree limb that's low hanging. So it's not just the things that are down at ground level. So you have to have just a wide perspective from the back of the vehicle to assist that driver.
Mike, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really important that at the end of the day, the spotter knows what their expectations are and knows what their job is. Oftentimes you see the spotters, somebody that maybe the junior of the fire station or the inexperienced person, and they don't really understand what it is that they're looking for. Like you indicated, those elevated, high obstructions. So it's really important that before you actually get in the task of being a spotter, you understand what it is that you're truly designed to do.
And just to even build on that, actually showing people the expectations, not just saying this is how we do it. We all see a lot of backing that the spotter may be a little lackadaisical about, I have to be back here. Really take that serious, because you can prevent a preventable event.
In most of your answers, you mentioned eye contact with the driver, the driver having some responsibilities. So what are some of the driver's responsibilities when backing an apparatus?
So it's important for the driver to constantly keep monitoring all sides of the vehicle, monitoring where that spotter is, making sure that they're keeping an eye on them. And at any point in time, if that spotter is out of field of view, we immediately stop that vehicle. If at any point in time, as the driver feels that they're in an unsafe position, immediately stop that vehicle and get out and do your own 360 like we indicated earlier.
I think one of the key things that Brian said was, look around. And I think with the modern vehicles today, with the systems that are in there with backup cameras and so forth, don't get focused entirely on one tool. Use, all mirrors, use the driving backup camera, and then, also glance out the window and see where your spotter is, and make sure that you maintain that eye contact, because if at any point in time you lose visibility of your spotter, the vehicle must come to a complete stop, and then you can reset your backing evolution. But that's a key part of this backing operation.
And, one other area that doesn't get a lot of thought, but it's really something that should be in a department's policy, is if you're in an ambulance and it's two people and you're transporting a patient, probably that provider in the patient compartment is not going to get out of the vehicle, but they can still act as a spotter. If care allows it, they could slide down the seat or go to the rear door, letting the driver know they're now unbelted, and kind of be a spotter from inside the vehicle, just one more set of eyes.
Yeah, I was going to mention, but Mike brought it up about driver monitoring systems coming into emergency services quite a bit to quite a bit of organizations, that they're a great tool, but we don't want to rely on them and get away from these backing policies and having a spotter and things like that. They're a great tool for the tool belt, but they're not a replacement for those individuals. So what is your suggestion for integrating the backing policy into our initial and ongoing driver training programs?
So Dave really hit on this earlier. It's really getting out and doing it and practicing it and refreshing on it. Just like we encourage driver training refresher, spotting should be one of those things that we do annually, just to make sure we're understanding the signals, making sure we know what we're looking for, and again, just that retraining aspect.
And another portion of this is buy-in and leadership from the field training officer, field supervisor, or even rank and file, your partner. Hold each other accountable. You can't have a vehicle back and nobody spots it and everybody's okay with that. It starts with everybody being held accountable and making sure that process is done.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that too, and I always hate to get to the discipline side of the coin, but holding everybody accountable it also goes to after an incident. So if there's an incident, it's not just the driver that's accountable for the operation of that vehicle. When it comes to disciplinary and dishing out the response at that time, it's got to go to everybody that's on that vehicle, because everybody has a responsibility to make sure that vehicle's back safely. And if you have an officer or other folks that are in that vehicle and aren't willing to get out and spot, by golly, I think you really need to be on that. That's a cultural issue.
So can you direct our listeners to a resource that can help them develop a backing policy or any other emergency response guidelines?
Chris, there's a couple different things that VFIS offers in this arena, and the primary being there's a manage your risk bulletin that's available on our website for safe backing practices, which outlines a lot of the topics that we've discussed here in this particular podcast, everything from administrative controls to spotter responsibilities to driver responsibilities. But in addition to those, there's also a short program, about 20 minutes in length, video-based program that's safe backing practices, which is a great tool to use as a refresher or an ongoing training issue to help your folks understand, the way things, the way you expect things to be done.
And we'll include a link to that written policy in the description of the program, and then we'll make sure to reference any materials that we have in this area. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure talking to you all today. I want to thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program today and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guests Mike Baker, Dave Bradley, and Brian DeQuinn once again for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFIS Risk Control at VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.